Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and I'm here to tell you all the books that I read in the month of August. You know the drill by now. I'm going to tell you the book, a quick summary of it, a thing I liked, and a thing that I didn't as much. Past Vendi is going to take it off and let you know what I read, starting with Booktubeathon and finishing up with around August 20th-ish, and I'm going to tell you what I read for the last 10 days. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first book that I read in the month of August and the third book that I read for the Booktubeathon was Jabberwocky by Daniel Coleman. Jabberwocky is a retelling / origin story for Lewis Carroll's poem Jabberwocky, featured in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Daniel Coleman's Jabberwocky follows Chaden, a farm boy who aspires to be one of the elite knights of Wonderland, as he is caught up in some personal drama / court intrigue that basically culminates in him having to hunt down the last Jabberwocky. So as far as things I liked, I think that Jabberwocky was a really fun, just like casual fantasy story. It was full of a bunch of classic fantasy tropes, you know, magical creatures, the fun, kinda dumb best friend, and just a lot of these hallmarks of classic high fantasy. It was also fairly short and easy to get through. I don't think you need to have like a super in-depth knowledge of any sort of lore to understand Jabberwocky and have fun with it. As far as things I didn't like, for an Alice in Wonderland based retelling, there weren't very many Wonderland elements, and that's something I really look for in retellings, is things that tie them to the original stories. I said it was like a fun fantasy. It didn't feel very Alice inspired. The real elements of the Alice story sort of only came in the last fourth of the book. What makes it, you know, doubly upsetting is that when they were incorporated into the story, I think it was twice as strong as the story was just on its own. So this had definite potential to be like a really great thing. Nevertheless, enjoyed it a fair bit. I ended up giving Jabberwocky a 2.75 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Shy Girls Write It Better by May Sage. Cassie Franklin is a shy accountant who writes erotica pretty successfully under the pseudonym Cassandra Frank. In her writing, she's incredibly confident, but in her real life, she is very shy and really unlikely to sort of act on the crush she has on her boss and CEO of her company. But when her boss, Carter Harris, kind of gets a hold of her latest manuscript, things get a little heated between the two of them. This is a really fun and interesting and diverting story. It went by super quickly. I think the romance was really cute and sweet, and I really liked Cassie as a protagonist. A lot of times in books like this, the protagonist is sort of like a cardboard cutout shell that, you know, you can sort of self-insert into, and that makes me a little uncomfortable, but Cassie felt like an actual person, like a person that I'd want to get to know and be friends with. And alongside her, Carter, who, while he's like super confident, is also like not a douchebag, which tends to be what the guys in books like this sort of default to. So I'm really happy that the two characters that I was rooting for were actually pretty well suited for one another and just nice people in general. My main con for this book, so the thing I didn't like, was that it was just too short. I felt like everything came by a little bit too quickly, and I would have liked it to be like longer by half. The book was about 180 pages. I think being about 270 would have made it, you know, just right, so that all the characters can develop on their own time and sort of have a sensical arc. Also, I think adding a more concrete plot to sort of push the story forward would have been definitely to the story's favor. Overall though, I had a lot of fun with Shy Girls Write It Better, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I was in a little bit of a slumpy mood, and I read a children's book, a picture book called The Children of Lear, to sort of get myself out of that. It is essentially a board book of sorts, following the old Irish folktale of the Children of Lear. Since I don't really review children's books, I'm a little hesitant to apply my usual rating style to it. As far as things I liked, I think that it was a well-done version of like telling a story in a really condensed, short way that's accessible to younger children. Also, the art style is just absolutely stunning. I spent more time, I think, looking at the pictures than I did reading the actual story. As far as things I didn't like, and I mean, it doesn't really matter because the story is made for, you know, younger children and not somebody my age, but I think that it could have had a little bit more expansion, wherein the plot would be like elaborated on just a little bit, just to give a little more insight as to what the plot actually is. My overall rating for The Children of Lear was a 3.25 out of 5 stars. The sixth book that I read for the Booktubeathon was The Amulet of Samarkand, book 1 of the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud. The Amulet of Samarkand follows the dual perspectives of Nathaniel, a young magician who is desperate to get revenge on an older one who humiliated him in his youth, and Bartimaeus, the djinn, which is a subclass of demon that Nathaniel calls from the other place, which is like the demon mother world, to do his bidding and help Nathaniel exact his revenge. What Nathaniel intends to be a humiliating little prank turns into a lot more than he signed up for, 4, Nathaniel finds himself in the middle of an attempt at a political takeover in England. Basically, Nathaniel and Bartimaeus have to figure out how both of them are going to survive this whole mess. Things I liked. You guys have heard me talk about this book series a million and one times. There's not very much that I don't like about it. I think that the characters are very well rounded. Even their uglier traits like pettiness and arrogance and hatefulness are done so well that you empathize with them even if they're terrible people. As far as like the whole trilogy arc, this is a really solid foundation for both Bartimaeus's and Nathaniel's respective personalities and their sort of dynamic together. And I'm mostly blanking for things I didn't like. I quite enjoyed most of this story again, which I didn't actually expect to love it this time around as much as I did as a child, but I think I liked it more because I appreciate more of the nuances. If anything, this time around, perhaps the plot was a little quick, but it is, you know, a middle grade, and those tend to be pretty pacey, so obviously I forgive it for that. Overall rating for The Amulet of Samarkand for me was a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read for the Booktubeathon was The Golems Eye, Book 2 of the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud. Golems Eye picks up 2 years after the end of The Amulet of Samarkand, but essentially what this book does is it introduces a sort of commoner's resistance, and commoners are people without magic. And we add a perspective in this book of Kitty Jones, a commoner who has a sort of resilience to magic, like she can withstand certain magical attacks, and she joins up with a resistance group to sort of topple the magicians who just are not really good people. And on the other hand, you have Nathaniel, who truly believes in the superiority and the duty of magicians to be the leaders, I guess because he is one. And their conflict, as well as the major overarching conflict of the trilogy, which I won't go into because spoilers, all sort of works against them and forces them to sort of team up in a way, but also fight against each other. It's just so good. Hopefully I avoided spoilers. So things I liked about The Golem's Eye. We're not going to talk about character because I did for the first one. Let's go with world building. I think that The Golem's Eye did a very, very good job of increasing the scope of the world. We find out a lot more about the global sort of conflicts in the world with magicians and their sources of power, and how they sort of, as history moves forward and as certain empires take over, magicians tend to flock towards the strongest one. I think it's a really good story about arrogance and how we always think when we have power that we're going to have it forever, and how, you know, that's all transient because of course people who had it before us also thought that they would have it forever, and it's just so good. Things I didn't like, goose egg. I really, really, really love this book. I mean, same as the first one, the plot is super, super pacey. You're thrown into the action. It doesn't really stop until the end, but I really love that. What could potentially be a problem for other people is there's some info dumpy-ish backstory. I think it's just the way that Stroud writes, and it's never actually annoying because we're not told anything, we're more shown, which I know doesn't make sense because usually when you think info dump, you think, oh, well, let's get told all this information. It's not like that. It's just like sort of extended flashbacky things. I personally really like it. I can see how somebody would not like it because sometimes it does cut in like right where there's like a big climactic battle thing. It didn't interrupt my enjoyment of the story. In fact, I think it helped with the pacing because it was too fast. It would just be like a whirlwind of awesome. And I think that that sounds really great in theory. I'm not sure if it would work in practice. I think that it worked really well in practice the way it is, and I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Once Booktubeathon finished, I picked up Ptolemy's Gate, which is book 3 and the conclusion to the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud. There's not really much I can say without spoiling this one. It takes place 3 years after The Golem's Eye, which is book 2. That resistance that Kitty was a part of, yeah, it seems like things are finally coming to fruition. London is at its breaking point, and the magicians are sort of losing their grip, and Nathaniel has to come to terms with that, and Bartimaeus has to sort of figure out how he's gonna survive this whole mess because Nathaniel's not making it very easy for him. Things I liked. I think this is the perfect conclusion. I am very, very frequently a little disillusioned with the conclusions of trilogies for young adult and middle grade books. It always feels like authors are reluctant to take it that one step further, and I'm very, very happy to say that Jonathan Stroud didn't do that. A solid like third of this book was just the climax, like the fun action stuff. Like it very much felt like the conclusion that the first 2 books were building towards, and I think that it was just really well done in this one. And the thing I didn't like about it, but it's also a thing I kind of did like about it, was that the stakes at the end almost felt too high. I cried like a baby when I finished this book, but I guess that's not really a bad thing. I really enjoyed crying because it meant that the emotional like catharsis was worth it, was worth the wait. I don't know what bad I can say about this. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I don't think I really disliked anything. I highly recommend reading this whole trilogy if you can. They're pretty great. They're really quick to fly through despite being about 500 pages each. The 7th book that I read in the month of August was a reread of Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. Outlander follows Claire, a World War II nurse, and through a series of events that aren't actually explained, Claire finds herself transported back in time to 1700s Scotland, just before the Jacobite Revolution. She's taken in by the Clan Mackenzie, and while she's there, she meets one particular Scotsman named James Fraser. The story basically just follows Claire's life, sort of readjusting to this new time period and coming to terms with the fact that she is sort of stranded in time. So as far as things I liked, Outlander is a really fun story, very, interesting and dynamic, and despite being about 800 pages, it kind of goes by fairly quickly. Additionally, the world building is quite atmospheric. It very much feels like you're there in 1700 Scotland when you're reading it, or at least I assume it does. I've never been to 1700 Scotland. But either way, it's a whole lot of fun to read. As far as things I didn't like, my main issue with the story that I got a lot more in this reread than I have in previous reads was the sexism and the abusive dynamics of Jamie and Claire's relationship. There is a scene where he beats her and he never really apologizes for that, as if an apology could, even make it okay, but he doesn't, and it really weirds me out that they're held up to be this pinnacle of relationships when that happened. And my second thing that I really want to mention, which I haven't heard spoken of in a talk about Outlander, is that it's homophobic. It does a lot to demonize queer people. The main villain or antagonist of this story is a gay man, and his gayness is sort of the crux of his villainy. It's just not good. Any other mention of queer men sort of implies that they're predatory pedophiles, and some of the actions of one of the other potentially gay male characters sort of feeds into this idea, and I'm just, dude, come on. You can do better. That said, I gave Outlander a 3.25 out of 5 stars. After that, I read Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Bali Kaur Jaswal. This book follows Nikki, a first generation or second gen Indian immigrant in the UK. Point is, Nikki is very modern. She doesn't really believe in more traditional roles that her super Punjabi mother kind of wants to impress upon her. Nikki just wants to sort of distance herself from this community and find out who she is separate from the culture that everyone seems to want to hawk on her. But push comes to shove, and she actually ends up becoming a literacy teacher for a group of Punjabi widows who are basically the castaways of this society. While Nikki is reevaluating her ideas of what it means to be a Punjabi woman, she finds herself in the middle of this weird cultural intrigue, the heart of which is the suicide and potential murder of a young woman from this community that she has found herself a part of, and it's just a great story. So as far as things I really liked about Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows, I think that it's both a really fun and funny story as well as being a deep and powerful one, and the balance is struck in a very clever, well done way, in my opinion. You do get some of the erotic stories that the Punjabi Widows have written in here, and they are a little sexy and a little funny, and just their interactions are hilarious and thought-provoking and heart-wrenching in the best possible ways. Every character in this feels very human. The sisterhood between the widows and Nikki and her mother and Nikki and her sister, and just all the ladies in this story makes me so happy. Each woman was written in such a distinct way, and I think that's what helped the reality of the story come through, because they all just reacted in different ways and had different values and different beliefs, and I didn't agree with all of them, but I loved all of them by the time I finished reading this book. And I think that's just such a valuable thing to have in a book, the ability to empathize and love the characters as if they were people, because in a way they really are. Also, and it's super shallow, but I think the cover's gorgeous. As far as things that I didn't like very much, the writing style was a little bit and then X happened. A little too much for me, and perhaps that's just a contemporary thing. Additionally, and you guys know at this point what I'm going to say, there are some info dumpy sections that really could have been better woven into the plot, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because you guys know that I don't like info dumps. Overall though, I think it was a really great story. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Maybe even a 4 upon some reflection. After that, I read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I buddy read Norse Mythology with my friend Maeve from the channel Scribble Maven, who I'll have linked in the description box below. You should definitely check her out if you're into any sort of writing or booktubing thing. She's just such an intelligent, well-spoken woman, and you won't regret it. Go check her channel out right now. And Norse mythology is actually exactly what the title suggests. It is a collection of Norse myths told by Neil Gaiman. As far as things I liked that it was a bunch of Norse myths told by Neil Gaiman. I think that Neil Gaiman's particular voice and writing style lends itself very well to the retelling of Norse mythology and any sort of old school high fantasy-esque sort of thing, which I think Norse mythology is a big influence for the most part. Say Norse mythology one more time, Bendy. Basically, I think his style and his voice are suited perfectly for the retelling of this sort of story. As far as things I didn't like, I think a problem was that I brought so much of my old knowledge to this. We don't really get introductions to the characters, so if for some reason you're not familiar with like Thor or the Norse mythos, you're gonna not really understand the character relationships and the dynamics and why people feel the way they do. It's very surface level. You're like, oh yeah, Loki's a trickster, but then at one point spoiler, my hand comes down, the spoiler's over, he kills Balder. And then you're left to wonder, okay, well, why did he do that? Why did he feel so strongly about this character? And if you don't have like background knowledge, you're not gonna know, and you just sort of have to go with it. Additionally, and this is very much because of the expectations that I went into it with, the stories felt very disjointed, and there wasn't really like a plot that held them all together, or not even a plot, more like a connecting thread. It very much felt like the first half was like, info dump, this is the world and who everyone is. And then the last bit was like, and this is Ragnarok, which is the end of times. And there was no really middle section, which told you how you got from point A to point B, like how you go from all these characters and their situations into the end of the whole known universe. It just felt incomplete. And because of that, the most I could give it was a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read in the month of August was, I do that every single time. No? Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I was lucky enough to receive this book in a package that I got from my lovely friend Lou from the channel Books Are a Way of Life, who I'll have linked in the description box below. Laszlo Strange, a foundling orphan boy turned librarian's assistant turned adventurer, has always been obsessed with this city called Weep. The city wasn't originally called Weep, but one day the memory of its true name was pulled out of everyone's minds. Laszlo's entire young adult to adult life has been spent poring over the secrets of Weep and trying to figure it out. He's absolutely in love with this very magical city that no one has had contact with in like 2 centuries. And one day, representatives and soldiers come from the city calling for scientists and things to come to the city to liberate it. So of course Laszlo is the first to jump on board with this, and when he gets to Weep, he realizes that things are not quite what they seem when he meets Sarai, a girl who can walk in people's dreams, whose skin is blue, and the story goes from there. Things I like about Strange the Dreamer. I mean, it has all the hallmarks that I consider make a Laini Taylor book. The prose is lush, like it's delicious. If I were to read it out loud, I feel like I'd get cavities from how sweet and savory and just sensuous the words are. It's beautiful. It's atmospheric as all hell, and the characters and their motivations, I live for them. I fell in love with even the worst of them because of how well Laini Taylor writes characters and motivations, and no one's perfect in any of her stories, but they're perfect to me as a reader because of how much I fall in love with them. Just all my favorite things, right? Setting, plot, character, 10s across the board, love it all. As far as things I didn't like, and I'm stretching a little bit here, sometimes the prose, because it's just so poetic and Laini Taylor-esque, sometimes that did get a little bit annoying, where just like 2 pages later, a phrase or a line would be repeated, and I know it's made to make it more like lyrical, but I was just like, you told me this 2 seconds ago, I don't need to know this again. Oh, and also, and this might be another Laini Taylor thing, but I believed it more in her previous story than I did here. There's some insta-love in here, or at the very least, insta-lust, that I feel like should have been built up to a little bit more, if you know what I mean. Of course, they are, teenagers, and if you've ever been a 17-year-old girl or boy, then you know. I mean, we've been there. Unless you're ace, which, like, in that case, probably not, but if you are a person who experiences sexual attraction, like, you get it, I thoroughly enjoyed Strange the Dreamer. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I can't wait to get my hands on Muse of Nightmares. I'm gonna get the UK cover to match this one because it's just so beautiful, and oh my god, I love this. I love this. I'm gonna have to reread it before reading Muse of Nightmares because it really is 2 halves of one story. So that is it for my books that I read in August. That's 10 books, which is a heck of a lot more than I thought I'd get to because I've been sort of slumpy in the past month, but I'm back at it I'm back on my reading game. I'm really excited to get to more books and share them all with you and talk about them with you guys. Let me know down below if you've read these books and what your thoughts on them are, or if you'd like to read some of these books so that we can just sort of talk about them and I can convince you to read them more than I already have. Anyway guys, that is it from me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to this channel. Now that I'm back in Boston, I will be back on a Wednesday, Saturday-ish posting schedule. Don't hold me to that, but I really will be trying. But anyway, that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.